Hello everyone! Since this is probably the first video that you're watching from this course, I want to welcome you to MAT 117 Applied Statistics, or rather a very abridged and fast version of it. I hope that everyone will have a pleasant experience in this course, and we'll get right into it here. So I've added, before we start material, a student sent me this last semester in one of my other statistics courses, and I thought it was one, funny, and two, will make sense for this course and for many of you, because you've probably signed up for statistics, but maybe you haven't taken a statistics course before, or you don't know what statistics is all about. And many of you have, in your introductions, said that math is not your strong suit, and I understand that. And I'm here to tell you that it's going to be okay, because statistics is not mathematics. And so statistics is many things, and we will use a lot of mathematics in this course. But it's not going to be your typical math course. It's not going to be like anything you've done before. Statistics is really going to be like learning a new language. We aren't going to do anything more complicated than add, subtract, multiply, and divide in here. And so if you're scared because it's a math course, you don't need to be scared. Okay? There'll be some other things in this course that are scary. Yes, of course, as there are in any course. But this is not a math course, so don't be scared. All right, so let's get started with the real basics of a statistics course. Okay, what are the most basic things that you're supposed to learn on the first day? So let's define those terms. The first thing is data. Data is the information that we gather from experiments and surveys. Data can be numerical values. It can be your eye color, your hair color. It can be any sort of information that you gain or that you gather from an experiment or any kind of survey. All right, so data. And then, of course, statistics. So what is statistics in general? Well, the book defines it as the art and science of learning from data, which sounds very exciting. More formally or more technically, a statistic, not the field of statistics, but a statistic is any summary of data. So if I have a bunch of values, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I sum them all up, or maybe I subtract them all from each other, or maybe I take what many of you know as the mean of the data, that is a statistic. When I take a bunch of data and I sort of boil it down to one number, that one number is called a statistic. So statistics as a field is the study of those summaries. Okay, so good information there, but it's okay if you don't really get it or know it right now. Right? And then the statistical process, which is basically the layout of this course, is always this. You formulate a statistical question. So usually when you collect data, whatever data you're collecting, you have a question in mind. Okay, and so that's the first thing you really need to think about is what is your question? Okay, so you have a question you're interested in, and then data is going to help you answer that question. So of course, then you collect it. So you formulate a question. Do freshmen have higher GPAs than sophomores at Shippensburg University? That could be my question. So I'd go out and I'd collect data, which would be, of course, the GPAs from sophomore and freshman. Then I would analyze it, and we'll do that in many ways in this course. And then lastly, of course, I'll interpret the results. So whatever that means. So a lot of that is left for us to learn later in the course, but this is generally how the course is going to go in these 4 steps. Okay, so let's look at some data. And the first data set that I want to look at is a data set about irises. An iris is a flower, okay, if you didn't know that. And so here's a typical data set, okay? I'll call them data sets, and they are sets of data. All right, so in this simple data set that I have here, okay, I've collected information about 8 irises. Okay, for every iris, I've collected 5 measurements. Okay, and so the measurements are called sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width. So I'll show you a picture of an iris and what those things are in a moment, because I'm sure right now you're probably wondering what the heck is a sepal, and I'll show you that. Okay, and then petals, and then of course what species of iris it is. This is only a small part of a larger data set, and in this data set there are 3 different types of species of irises. Okay, so the only one shown is called Setosa, but there are 2 more. Okay, so there's a picture of the 3 different kinds of irises: Setosa, versicolor, and virginica. Okay, and then petals, and then sepals. So the sepal is the wide thing that many of you might think of as a petal, but the petal is sort of the long part coming out from the stem to the sepal. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. That's just me telling you too much information about irises. A variable, which are in the data set that we have, sepal length, sepal width, petal width, and species. A variable are the characteristics that we observe when we take measurements. Okay, so those 5 things that we observed about the 8 irises that I looked at here in the data set that I've shown you are variables. All right, so let's talk about the different types of data that we will see in this course. Okay, so there are many different types. We're going to talk about the 2 main ones, or there are many ways that I could categorize these different variables. And you've probably heard of these terms before. The 2 that we're going to use are categorical and quantitative. And sometimes I'll call quantitative numerical variables. Okay, so categorical and quantitative. The first one that we'll talk about is a categorical variable. And as the name suggests, a categorical variable is a variable whose values belong to one of a set of categories. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The variable contains only different categories, not a large number of things. So specifically, a categorical variable has values with no units associated with them. Okay, so up above in our toy data set that we're using, not actually toys, in the iris data set, up there we have 5 different measurements, and it turns out that species is a categorical variable, okay, because there are only a few different categories that an iris can be. However, for the other 4, those have units associated with them. So they're all measured in centimeters, I believe. Okay, and so I can technically have an iris that has any centimeter length sepal or petal, length or width. And so technically there are an infinite amount of possibilities for those measurements. But for species, I only have 3 options, or 3 categories that an iris could fall into. So species has no units associated with them. It's just Setosa, versicolor, or virginica. I can't tell the difference between or there's no like tangible difference between Setosa, virginica, and versicolor without looking at the other data. All right, so before I get too lost there, let me give you a number of examples. So the first example is a year classification. So maybe in high school, you're either a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. Okay, there's only a couple categories there. Another one is eye color: green, blue, brown, so on and so forth. And then the last one that I want to show you is a more tricky categorical variable, and that is a zip code. So the Shippensburg zip code is 17257. I grew up in 17356. Okay, those the values of a zip code are numbers, but that doesn't mean it's a quantitative variable. Because can you tell me the difference between the numerical difference between 17257 and 17356? Technically, you could subtract those two numbers and you'd get 99. But what is the difference between, what does that 99 represent? It doesn't represent anything. Okay, so a difference in zip codes has no meaning. A difference between blue and green eyes has no meaning. I can't do blue minus green. Whatever blue minus green is has no value, has no difference. Okay, so zip codes are tricky because you can technically subtract the numbers. They are numbers, but they have no meaning when adding or subtracting them. Okay, so that's the main difference between a categorical and a quantitative variable, is that for categorical variables, I can't add or subtract or multiply or divide them and get something meaningful, but I can with quantitative variables. Okay, so species is a categorical variable up in our data set. The other types are quantitative. So a quantitative variable are values, are numbers that have units. Okay, so the values of a quantitative variable are numbers that have units. So for instance, height, weight, IQ, number of states that I visited, they are all numerical variables because they have units associated with them. So we have pounds or inches or difference in IQ points. There's like some meaning there of my IQ is 20 points higher than yours or 30 points lower than someone else's. And of course, number of states visited has units as well, states. Okay. So the other four, sepal length, sepal width, petal length, and petal width, they're all numerical or quantitative variables. Okay, so I am now going to ask you, we're going to have what's called a your turn moment here, where I'm going to give you some data or ask you some questions, and it's going to be on you to do them. So these are going to act as our practice worksheets in preparation for the graded worksheets that you'll do hopefully after watching these videos. So the data set that I'm going to have you work with is another famous one. So the IRIS data set is actually quite famous. So is this diamonds data set. Okay, and so you know what a diamond is, hopefully, but you probably don't know how many measurements you can take on a diamond. Okay, there's a bunch of them. And so here is, this picture gives you sort of a background of the diamonds data set. I'm going to ask you, here is the your turn. Okay, I give you this data set. On diamonds, it has a number of different variables. I want you to identify each variable as either categorical or quantitative. Okay? And so I'm going to stop there. If you need to, you can go back to this slide and look at it, and hopefully it'll give you some info on whether it's categorical or quantitative. Of course, you'll have these slides available to you to look, so you don't need to watch the video and stop it there to look. Okay, so this is your turn. Please complete it. There will be answers to these posted. All right, thank you.